Thank you, Michael. Hi, everybody. My name's Kelly Crane. I work with Michael on the collaborative, and I'm housed at the University of Maryland. And it is my sincere pleasure to introduce today's session. It takes two: collaboration between VR education to deliver pre-employment transition services. And we're going to hear from the Vermont folks today who are just doing fabulous work around this area. So what you're going to hear, first of all, Vermont VR is going to talk about their culture and their framework for delivering pre-employment transition services to students. You're also going to hear about lessons learned from a recent RSA-funded model demonstration project that promoted access and utilization of important work-based learning experiences and other career readiness activities for students. The team is also going to share some strategies and tools that promote effective collaboration. And then finally, we're going to hear directly from a local level team that is helping promote transition experiences for young people. So just real quick, I want to introduce our Vermont team. We have Rich Tulikangas and Tara Howe, who are both from the State Vocational Rehabilitation Agency in Vermont. Rocco Giselman, Rachel Potts, Elizabeth King, and Mary Kate Casper, who are our local team members who will be sharing their experiences, collaborating together, again, to deliver these important work-based experiences. Before I turn it over to them, I just want to set the stage here. We talk a whole lot about collaboration, and it's not always a very easy thing to do. We know that collaboration is not just a group of people who work together, but a group of people who really trust one another. And we know that collaboration works best when that team is focused on a common outcome or common goal. There's lots of literature out there on interagency collaboration. We do know that it is a strong predictor of positive post-school outcomes, including employment for youth with disabilities. And even though there's a lot of literature out there, we also know that it's one of the least studied practices around transition in looking at that impact of student outcomes. But there are a couple of good studies out there that we wanted to just alert you to. One of them is the Circles Project, and that's Val Mazzotti out of UNC Charlotte. And the Circles Project looks at that level of collaboration at actually from three different levels: from the student level, the local level, and then the state level. And then another good research project was the Mystic Project, or the Maryland Seamless Transition Coalition. And that looked at local level teams doing collaborative planning to impact student outcomes. So those are a couple of good examples for you to look at. And then this here is a framework or foundation for collaboration. And just looking at this continuum here, first of all, you need to set the context. Why are you coming together? Why are these different partners coming together to plan? What is the history of those agencies and working together? From there, you move on to that negotiation, and that is, what is that common outcome or goal that you are all trying to achieve? And looking at what everybody brings to the table. Then you go on to implementation of that collaborative team. And that's when you really look at the roles of the team, assigning roles and responsibilities. You're continuing to build trust by working together. And then you move to the last phase, which really focuses on those outcomes or the impact that your collaborative relationship has had. And in this case, we are really looking at the impact on student outcomes. So this is just a quick foundational piece when you think about collaboration. I am going to turn it over now to Tara, and she is going to share with you very specifically the Vermont model.
Thank you so much, Kelly. My name is Tara Howe. I'm the Transition Program Manager out of Voc Rehab, Vermont, and I use pronouns she and her. I'm so excited to be here today, and thank you to NTAC, the collaborative, for giving us some time today to talk about what we've been doing in Vermont, because we're really excited about it. And I think we've got some really good things going on, some great foundation to move things forward. So just to say a little bit about who we are, I feel like we always need to start with what are our guiding principles in terms of Vermont VR. We really focus on thinking about how we work together both internally and with our partners. And I really want to highlight the last two guiding principles that are on here, that customer, staff, and partners will be engaged, valued, empowered, and respected. We really come from that perspective whenever we're thinking about a new initiative, systems change, whatever it might be. We always think about who's going to be impacted, how does it impact them, and what value add does it have for them as well. So really being thoughtful about that. And then also that we really are supporting all students to exit high school with a coordinated plan for education, training, and/or employment. And in order to do that, we need to work collaboratively with schools, with agencies, with community partners to really come to the table, because we know that transition in and of itself can be really overwhelming for students and families. And if we're not on the same page ourselves, it makes it that much more complicated. So really coming from that perspective. And that our administration here at Vermont VR really fosters a culture of communication and partnership. So moving on and talking a little bit about our youth team. So if you're curious about what the transition program looks like in Vermont, we have transition counselors who serve youth from the ages of 14 through the ages of 24. So, and which is something that we have recently made the change of. Before, they just had served in school and pre-ETS. And we've made some changes, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But those transition counselors are really the hub. We have youth employment specialists through a partner who are kind of the employment arm that have a lot of that connection and do a lot of work readiness and career exploration activities. We have business account managers whose entire role is to connect with the business community and establish strong relationships, so that when we want to do work-based learning activities, progressive employment activities, employment in general, no matter what the age, we have strong relationships to build from to be able to set those up. We also utilize job coaches. Benefits counseling is a really important part, especially for youth as they're making that transition from high school, and for families to understand. That's always an area that we're looking at. And then of course, supervisors and managers. The one thing I do want to say, as you can see, we have a pretty good sized youth team. So even in that, we really work hard to establish strong communication. And it's that regular, clear communication about responsibilities and fostering trust and partnership that helps us serve youth in the best way. So moving on, just to see kind of a visual of what that looks like. So the transition counselor, we call them the hub. So they have the knowledge of all the resources. They are core team facilitators, and I'll explain that a little bit more shortly. They help manage the VR case, and they really help to link to resources. Versus a youth employment specialist has that link to the business community. We have something called Creative Workforce Solutions, where within a community, everyone who is knocking on businesses' door to set up opportunities to look for employment for customers are all coming together and having that conversation. So you don't have 5 different entities all knocking on the same door. And when you have small towns, it's really important to be on the same page. And as we go, I'm going to now shift it to Rich to talk a little bit about linking learning to careers.
Greetings all. My name is Rich Tulikangas, Career Advancement Director for Voc Rehab, Vermont. And I'm going to just share a little bit of information with you about the Linking Learning to Careers project, which We conducted over the past 5 years, just concluded actually on September 30. So we just wrapped up and completed our evaluation activities. Have been doing a lot of reporting and disseminating on the results of this project. But it was funded by the U.S. Department of Education Rehabilitative Services Administration, again, beginning in 2016. And we were one of 5 states. We're fortunate enough to get funded for this project.
Excuse me, Rick, 1 second. Can you turn your camera on? Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I did that. My apologies. I clicked on it, but I guess I didn't open it. Are we good, Michael?
Yes, you're good. Good to go. Thanks. I
All
think
right.
people want to see your handsome mug. So
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yes, so in any case, we were one of 5 states funded through this Disability Innovation Fund project. And in our case, for linking learning to careers, we employed a randomized control trial design. So we recruited 800 students from all 12 of our district offices around the state, half of whom were randomly assigned to receive what we call enhanced services, half of which would participate in the regular VR transition program with our transition counselors and youth employment specialists. So just to give you a sense of this, the enhanced services that we incorporated into the project include a continuum of work-based learning experiences that was really at the core of what these projects were funded for by the U.S. Department of Ed. So in our case, we focused on job shadows, unpaid internships, and competitive employment wherever possible. And interestingly, for our project, we had a significant emphasis on looking at post-secondary education. And that was everything from exploration through a campus visit and tour, for example, meeting with college counselors, to taking what was called an Intro to College and Careers course through our partner at Community College of Vermont, and then possibly other dual enrollment courses while they're still in high school, and even some contracted courses that we worked with Community College of Vermont on. In addition to that, we thought it was very important for us to have some very intensive assistive technology support. Folks are probably familiar with the fact that schools are supposed to provide assistive technology for high school students. Usually it just relates to success in classes. And what we found is that the degree and level of expertise of the AT supports in schools varied tremendously. So we had 2 full-time AT specialists who worked directly with our enrolled students and really supported them also in moving into post-secondary experiences or work-based learning experiences. And then transportation is extremely important. Vermont's a very rural state. I think it's a challenge probably in every state, but we wanted to make sure we had resources to support that as well. And there are a number of key things that we learned as a result of our experience with linking learning to careers. Tara mentioned this one already, which is about staying with youth from high school through adulthood. So part of our LLC design was that we enrolled students initially as they were sophomores or juniors in high school, but then we stayed with them through school completion and had that continuity, that relationship that had been built with them while they're in high school, which was a very important element. Secondly, I should mention that we added staffing capacity to our VR transition services through the project. So we added an additional position in each of our district offices called a career consultant, who was the point person working with each of our enrolled students. And we also added an additional youth employment specialist working just with LLC enrolled youth. So as a result of that, we really doubled the size of youth teams in each of our districts, and it became increasingly important to really sort the roles, and when communicating with schools and other partners, to really understand who was doing what and work with our students. And so the teams really came together and realized they needed to meet on a very regular basis, usually weekly, coordinate their efforts and coordinate all of their communications. And again, I mentioned expanded AT services to support youth, whether it's in a work environment or in school. We greatly, and by the way, we continue now to have a greater AT capacity at Voc Rehab as a result of this work. And the post-secondary exploration and experiences were extremely important and really led to our developing what we call a progressive education model. And the idea is essentially that everyone is ready for something. And part of our job is to figure out what they're ready for, take some of those initial steps, help them to be successful, and develop their readiness for a next step, if you will. So it's a progression of activities that may start very small and continue to grow and may ultimately lead to more students enrolling, for example, in post-secondary programs. And we found that did happen through linking learning to careers. And then we conducted constant evaluation and fidelity monitoring. So just really having the help of our national partners, including the University of Maryland, our friends Kelly and Ruth, who are a part of this presentation, as well as Mathematica as a national evaluation partner, were with us from day one. They were actively engaged with all of our youth teams, including regular calls as well as site visits. So there was a really a great deal of attention paid to sticking with the model as we described it and measuring what the impact of that was. So with that, I think there may be a question. Does somebody want to share that with me?
So there is a question that came in, Rich, and it is each transition counselor given a budget? If so, how much? And I don't know if this question is specific to the Linking Learning to Careers project or just the VR system.
Sure. I mean, I can answer it on behalf of Linking Learning to Careers, and then Tara can say more about that as it relates to transition counselors and our youth teams. But we did not have a designated budget per site. However, we did have a pool of funds that were available for AT supports, for post-secondary exploration and coursework, for supporting work-based learning experiences in a variety of ways. But it wasn't a designated amount per district, if you will. So thank you for that. I'm going to turn it back to Tara.
Thanks, Rich. So there were some great questions in the Q&A, and I'll answer those as we go. So I want to talk a little bit about the transition of transition, because I know other VR agencies are kind of figuring out how they provide pre-employment transition services. As I mentioned, we started with a model of all our transition counselors, and there were 14 across the state who worked solely in school, providing pre-employment transition services and transition services. And then once students graduated, they would then move to a general counselor. And this is separate from the LLC that Rich was describing. And so what we learned from that experience is that a couple things. First of all, families really appreciate the idea of having somebody at the table at an IEP meeting who's going to be there after that student graduates. And that has a significant impact on their ability to kind of think about it and process it and consider what the future brings. So that's one reason why we've made this change. So our transition counselors, there's now 26 of them across the state that serve the ages of 14 through the age of 24. And we've made this shift intentionally looking at the population that we were serving, and half of who we serve are ages 24 and under. So in terms of resources, someone had asked about youth employment specialists. For every transition counselor, there's a youth employment specialist. And we've looked a lot at the adult side to ensure that there is enough support on the adult side as well. But like I said, half of who we serve, and I don't think Vermont is unique in this, half of who we serve is the age 24 and under. We also wanted to really think about how can we serve as many students as possible with pre-employment transition services. And so by increasing the number of counselors, even though they're serving young adults as well, we could split up the schools, and schools are not necessarily side by side. So, you know, if they want to travel, it could be one school's an hour away and then another one's an hour the other way. So the amount of time that was spent in travel for a student, for a transition counselor who was serving, say, 8 schools was just not practical, and they were losing a lot of time. And so being able to have more concentrated time in a school with that team and establish those relationships, we thought would not only increase the number of students that we were serving, but also increase those partnerships. I think I just answered all of those. So moving on to the next one. One thing I did want to say about the budget. So in terms of our current budget, we don't tend to spend a ton under pre-ETS because there's limited things that we can spend those funds for. So right now, the transition counselors have the same budget as our general counselors in terms of providing services. So, and that's because we do also have students who are going to college, who are doing certificate programs, credential programs, so many things that they need support around. So, so moving on, our program shift also provided so many more ways to partner as well. Looking at, we have what are called work-based learning coordinators in the schools, and not every school has one. They usually have somebody who does the work-based learning piece, but it just naturally provides some stronger connections around this. I think one of the benefits we learned from linking learning to careers, the business account manager has always been active in what's going on with youth, but we really brought the business account manager in as a youth team member. And it really has strengthened the collaboration, not only within the youth team, but being able to connect to other community partners who are also working with businesses. We also are always looking at how to connect with more staff in the school, because it's not only special educators or special ed directors, like I said, the work-based learning coordinators, school guidance counselors, nurses, anybody who's holding those IEPs or 504s. It just lets us strengthen those connections. And again, enhancing relationships with families. I think that's a huge part of what we really want to do. And I think about benefits counseling. It's always on my mind to make sure that we connect with those students while they're in school and be able to continue to work with them and help families understand benefits and what it means in terms of work. And then increasing, enhancing collaboration via core transition teams. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but really working together in district teams to serve students as they make that transition from high school to life after. So moving on.
Tara, can I interrupt? There's a question that just came in that it goes along with the partner piece. How do you partner with the Division for the Blind Counselors team within schools to ensure students are directed to the appropriate VR agency?
Right, so we work in collaboration with DBVI. We actually work very closely together and have that understanding between each other that as we identify students on one side or the other, whoever should be the lead, that we're always communicating around that to ensure that students are getting what they need, because we know that they have significant expertise in that area and we have expertise in some other areas. And so how do we, again, collaborate to ensure those students get what they need?
And Tara, one other question, these are so relevant to what you're talking about right now, so thought we could interject them here quick instead of saving till the end. But this other question is, what data has been most helpful in sharing the success of these types of partnerships? And do you give assessments to the students? And what data do you share with VR, the schools, and families?
That's a great question. Aside from the core transition teams, we do regular surveys that go out to students, that go out to the staff that we work with, that go out to families. We do that on a regular basis. I forget if it's every other year, every 3 years. And we always look at that information and are very thoughtful in the questions that we ask in terms of how people understand VR and the services and if they got what they needed. And then for our partners, if they even understand VR in the first place. And I know that sounds like a really simple thing, but when you've got changes in community partners in terms of the staff, or changes on our end, or something has shifted, like pre-employment transition services, or our whole system in terms of now serving those students to the age of 24, it's really important that we stay connected around all of that. Any other questions before I continue on, Kelly? Thank you for watching that.
Yes, there is one other question that would relate to what you're just talking about. And then I think after this question, we can move on to the next section. And this question, Tara, is, are the students in the program all VR consumers, or do you have separate case type for them?
I'm not sure if they're asking if they're potentially eligible. Everybody that we serve are potentially eligible. In starting, we always start with that process of ensuring that they are potentially eligible on an IEP or 504. In those cases where we do serve students who are out of school, who may have dropped out, we still serve them, but we don't start with the potentially eligible process. PAS, what we call PAS. That's how we track that. And then the other piece I wanted to share about data, it's a great question about how do we know that interagency collaboration works? It's a great question because as I talk more about core transition teams, we don't necessarily target a particular student and then watching that one student go all the way through. We do, gather that information from families in terms of effectiveness, but we've been spending a lot of time talking about how do we track that? And I think a lot of it is more qualitative in the sense of, are we working together to make things more efficient? And then how are we documenting that? So we're always looking at that. Right, correct. That's why we do not start them in pre-employment transition services. Okay, shall I continue?
Sounds good, Tara.
Okay. So I've talked about these interagency core transition teams. When this first started, I was actually, when pre-employment transition services started up, I was a transition counselor myself in the field. And the idea of core transition teams has kind of come in and out over the years in Vermont. But the idea of bringing it back to ensure that we are all communicating, and I say we as in the schools, as in VR, DBVI, developmental services, mental health services, and then everybody else in between, that we're all on the same page in terms of what services are being provided, who's providing them, and who's taking the next step, and how are we coordinating that? Because it's really easy to either duplicate efforts or have there be some miscommunication about who's doing what or who's responsible for what. So really focusing on, from the beginning, what is pre-employment transition services and how does this impact you? I think the real focus on these core transition teams has been, how do we have the conversation about how this directly relates to who you serve and the job that you do? And I think that's what always has brought the value add for people, is that we really take a lot of time to understand what is it that they need to know more about? What is it that they're concerned about for the students that they're serving? And bigger picture, to always create an effective transition process for students. And so every area is different, right? So the more, in Vermont, we do have more city-like areas, like a Burlington, which is pretty huge, versus we have smaller communities, more rural communities. And the strengths and the challenges are very different. And so being able to identify where things are working really well and where there's gaps needs to be on a district basis. So in these teams, the intention is sharing resources, information, processes, everything that's going to help that student get what they need. And we also work in collaboration with a lot of the local, they have interagency networking teams as well within like mental health or whatever, the directors, we call it LIT or LINT, where they get together, making sure that we're connecting with them, that everybody is in communication and that people are not out of the loop around what's going on. So you might be curious about everybody who's involved. It really depends upon the district and who's engaged and interested, but it could potentially be all of the people on this list. You know, if there's 12 community colleges, as there's 12 Agency of Human Services districts where we have an office. So it's great that we have a representative from each of the community colleges as much as possible. Private colleges, our WIOA partners, Department of Labor, Agency of Education has been really strong. Department of Health, Children with Special Health Needs, Department of Mental Health, DCF. We also work with Vermont Family Network, Vermont Center for Independent Living. I could go on, but it really is unique to each district. And typically our transition counselors are the facilitators of this group, though we do encourage if they can get a co-facilitator from outside of VR, that's helpful too. So it's that shared responsibility, shared leadership concept. And then I think one thing that we learned through COVID is that doing it virtually is a lot easier when you've got representative from 6, 7 different schools and then all these other community partners and agencies. To try to get everybody in one location on a regular basis is a challenge. So we found that virtually actually helps a lot to pull people together. So, no, we're in Vermont, Susanna. Interagency collaboration is across the board in all that we do, not just in transition, but just to talk about a couple of these other pieces. The state agency core team. So just as we have districts, we have a state agency core team with representatives from Agency of Education, Department of Health, and all of the agencies to really be having, again, these conversations on how are we staying in communication with each other around the different initiatives? How do they interconnect? And I'm really focusing a lot lately on how do we support what's happening in the district teams. Annual interagency core team event. So we actually just had it on Tuesday and it went famously. That's actually our 7th annual. And what it does is pulls all the district core teams together and the state agency core team. And we had a virtual event this year, and it's a combination of professional development and an opportunity for the core teams to have meetings about what have we done in the last year, what do we want to do, and how are we going to get there? And we provide a lot of tech assistance around structuring that. We only choose professional development that they've specifically asked for. So we do surveys to get that information. We check in again with state agencies around what's on their mind. We have a lot of different representatives coming from different experiences, sharing and learning together. And so this theme was reconnect, re-engage, and re-energize, which we thought was perfect as we are hopefully coming on the other side of COVID. And then also, I work a lot with, there's an Agency of Education liaison, John Spinney. He and I meet on a regular basis, just the two of us, and talk about our collaboration together. He actually comes on an annual basis to meet with the transition counselors to talk about Agency of Education, about school experience, understanding IEPs, 504, transition plans, work-based learning, all of that. So we do a lot of communication back and forth beyond the state agency core team. We even have another meeting that's only around specifically those required services as a student transitions from high school to post-high school. So looking at VR, DBVI, DS in the schools, and how are we collaborating to make sure those students are getting connected and getting hopefully employment prior to graduation. We also are always doing initiatives. We have a couple right now in collaboration with schools and the designated agencies, again, to always look at what is best practice. How do we identify that? How do we work together? And we often come from the perspective of where are we seeing gaps that are going on? So I mentioned that work-based learning, it's not necessarily being able to be provided across the state in every place. It looks a little bit different. And we really want to support that because we can't serve absolutely everybody on an IEP and 504, and those who aren't deserve the services as well. So really working together with them. This summer we did a career exploration program that we were super excited about, even amid COVID, and deciding, I think it was like May 1st that we decided we could officially do it in person. But we served 144 students and worked with 110 different employers to provide paid work experiences. And they also had a component, a curriculum component included, and it was such a positive experience across the board. We plan on doing it again. We learned a lot. But again, that happened with interagency collaboration. We also have a youth advocacy council, and that's for youth between the ages of 14 to the age of 25. Typically, they have been connected to either VR or DBVI, but it's not a requirement. But we're really excited about this piece because how can we serve youth and young adults in the best way if we're not making sure their voice is heard as we think about different initiatives, different system changes, interagency, everything. So we really have worked hard to establish that. And this year we have shifted it. So we actually co-facilitate it with the Vermont Center for Independent Living, who provide so much expertise and training opportunities to really help those youth with first self-advocacy, so gaining those skills, and then looking at disability advocacy. And then we have an annual youth summit as well. And then we also do College Compass, which is just, it's an adaptation of college steps, but it is very different from college steps. So we think about those students who are not being served in other ways, who could really benefit from having somebody to support them as they get started in a credentialing program, in a college program, just need that extra help first semester, first year around the academic piece. Are they getting the resources they need? Are they getting the accommodations? Are they asking for the accommodations? Helping them navigate that world so that they have the best experience from the beginning. We saw a lot of students who were dropping out after the semester or year because they just weren't connecting in the way they needed to. We're always expanding that. We started with one campus and now we have 5, and we've moved it into our community college system as well, and we're expanding it. Next slide. And with that, I think, are there any questions, Kelly, before I hand it?
You know, there's one question, but I think the local team who is speaking next might touch on this. So that question is, and Rocco, you can determine, and Tara, what is the best way you found to connect students and or families to a VR counselor and the schools as part of this process?
Happy to take that one on. So hi all, my name is Rocco Gieselman. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a transition program coordinator for Vermont Voc Rehab. And just to break that down a little bit, so I carry a normal transition counselor caseload supporting our Washington County District Office, but I also provide support to our transition program statewide. So that's why the title isn't actually transition counselors. Anyway, great question, Megan, about that. So we rely heavily on school staff to actually be our referral sources. So best practice is connecting with school staff members at the start of the year and throughout it to do many caseload reviews and see who's on their radar and might be a good referral to Voc Rehab. And then they support us in scheduling an introduction meeting either during the school day for that student or an after hours one for the student and their family. So we can't do what we do without school staff being on board as well, which leads us pretty nicely into our next slide here. I'm going to introduce some other members from our local Washington County core team who are going to share a bit about what this core team model in action has been like for them. So I see some have turned their cameras on. Excellent. And Mary Kay, you're welcome to turn your camera on now as well. I'll start by having you introduce yourself with your name, your role, and your organization. And we'll start with Rachel.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Potts, and I am the Work-Based Learning Coordinator for Harwood Union High School, which is located in Central Vermont.
And next, Elizabeth.
Hi, everybody. My name is Elizabeth King. I am a high school special education teacher at Harwood Union High School, and I work with Rachel. I case manage all of our 18 to 22-year-old students that are participating in a IEP transition program.
And Mary Kay.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mary Kay Casper, and I work at Washington County Mental Health Service in the Developmental Services area. I'm the Assistant Director for Case Management, Community Integration, and Advocacy, which includes employment. And I work closely with all of my colleagues here on the transition program with DS individuals that come to us.
Excellent. And for folks in our national audience, how do we define developmental services eligibility? Because that'll be an important key to our discussion here.
So in terms of providing and being eligible for developmental disability services, an individual, a student, that developmental disability must occur before the age of 18. And there must be an IQ of less than 75 or a diagnosis of a pervasive developmental disorder, such as autism. Also, there must be substantial deficits in an adaptive behavior that occurs before 18. And what I mean by an adaptive behavior is kind of a collection of social and practical skills that all of us learn to function in our daily lives. And so folks must have deficits in those kinds of skills, adaptive skills. And we do lots of evaluations to determine all of this.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So all three of you have been active core team members at least for the 5 years I've been around. So I'm so glad you're able to join us today and share a little bit about what your experience of our local core team is. The first question I'll have you answer is, what do you value about our local core team? Why do you keep coming back? And maybe we'll do the same order.
Okay, so I'll start. Yeah, I think really the component of the core team that I value the most is actually the network of connections that exists. There's so many experts at the table that provide the group with really important information that often influences the work that we do with students. So we're able to problem solve together and share resources. I've often reached out to members of the team to help with community contacts or funding for employment and training. And also with benefits counseling. I also really value the core team conference. It's a great opportunity to learn more about the labor market and hear what other teams are doing across the state. And hearing directly from the students and adults with disabilities about their transition experiences has been influential for me. And lastly, just to highlight the success of the model. Right, when I see students out in the community who continue to hold their positions or find new employment, I know it's actually working. So all of the folks in the background who are networking and providing job coaches and training are making a difference in the lives of our students as they're adults. And you know, these adults are contributing members of our community, which is really exciting.
Great, thank you. And Elizabeth.
I think Tara mentioned that we just had the statewide core team conference this week, and our local Washington County core team came together at that conference and talked about the 4 cornerstones of the interagency partnership. And so we talked about networking, coordinating, cooperation, and collaboration. And when I think about those 4 cornerstones, and when I reflected at the conference on Tuesday, I was thinking about how valuable it's been for me to network at the core team. It's been really important for me to connect with other special educators from other schools that are doing similar work with 18 to 22-year-old students, and really working hard on transition plans and that indicator 13 in IEPs. And to talk about our shared experience and get ideas and connect and problem solve has been super valuable. And the other piece is the collaboration at the core team. Hearing about resources coming together and problem solving has been super valuable. It feels really like we're a member of a community and coming together to support these students, and we're not just in it alone at our little high school in rural Vermont. And that there's really a network of people and organizations that can work together to help these students on their pathway to employment.
Excellent, thanks. And Mary Kay.
Well, I want to echo what's already been said. I feel the same way. And also to being someone that was here from when you started, Rocco, and seeing the growth in the core transition teams and our ability to be in relationship with each other so that we can work together to brainstorm and support each other in addressing issues that each of us have. I mean, the transition from youth to adult can oftentimes be difficult because the services can be different. And how do we work together? It's just been amazing to me, the kind of support and resources that we offer each other to address the issues and to provide the best shift that can occur, the transition that's as smooth as possible for our students that are coming into adult services. And I get to see the students when they are in adult services and the success as a result of the types of support and resources that we can offer in working together. And this ends up being an impact that affects our students as an adult for their lifetime. And in my area, I see them for the rest of their lives. And it's pretty powerful to see that success that occurs.
Excellent, thank you. And I know that we're getting kind of close to time, so I'll combine the last 2 questions a little bit. And Elizabeth, maybe have you start by answering what was one of the challenges that our core team identified in the transition from school to adult developmental services? And what role did the core team have in coming up with a solution?
One example we wanted to share is, I think Mary Kay explained a little bit about the students that will qualify for developmental services when they exit high school. And for the population of students we work with, those are often students that we are working hard to get them paid employment. And they will often go out during the school day with a job coach to work. And our hope is that they will qualify for up to 25 hours of supported employment when they enter adult services. And there's a funding process that students go through with their families and our designated agency. And that funding process takes a couple months for us to, for the team to go through the process and go to the local funding board and then the equity funding board. And students were getting, there was a timeline for that process, and students were often getting their waiver approved just a few days before they exited high school or graduated. Sometimes there was a few weeks, but often it was not enough time for students, for the designated agency to then hire a staff to support that student at work and for us to do any cross-training. So there was this gap in services where a student would reach their 22nd birthday and we couldn't serve them at the school any longer. but they just got their funding package, and the designated agency hadn't had time to hire a new job coach, and there was no cross training. So it would mean maybe that student couldn't go to work for a few weeks. They didn't have an opportunity to get trained by us, who had known the student for years and had been working with that employer for years to support that student on the job. So we brought this problem to our local core team and started talking. Are other people having this problem? This is impacting a lot of our students. So we, the core team really helped us kind of define the problem, and we did some information gathering to see if this was impacting other students at other schools. And I think we were able to kind of brainstorm some next steps and identify who at the core team could really help us solve this problem. And there was a few people willing to kind of run it up the ladder and talk to the right people and figure out how we could get that timeline for funding to happen sooner. And it ended up that we kind of got the policy changed and were able to go to funding a month early for those students that have paid employment. So there wouldn't be a gap in their employment, and so that they wouldn't risk losing their jobs. And we could do a really thoughtful transition with the new job coach in terms of overlapping with the school team and training them on how to support that student at work under our progressive employment model. So yeah, that's the example.
Yeah, thank you so much for that beautiful overview. And I really want to make sure folks on the call today recognize that that didn't just impact Harwood students. That was a change that happened countywide. So because of the awesome work that Harwood and Washington County Mental Health Services did together, the whole entire core team really benefited and continues to benefit. It's been a couple of years since that happened, and it's been a real game changer. So I appreciate all the work that you three did on that. And, you know, it's been excited to see it continue to be helpful. With that, I know we're getting close to time and might have a few more slides. So I think I'll turn it back over to Tara. Oh, no, just kidding. Back over to me still. So want to thank first and foremost our fellow presenters here, Rich Chulikangas, Tara Howe, Kelly Crane, Ruth Allison, our fantastic panelists, Mary Kay Casper, Elizabeth King, Rachel Potts. Also want to thank the folks at NTAC for this opportunity to share what we've been up to in Vermont with you all, Michael Storr and Stephanie Euler in particular. And final thanks to you all for being here and joining us this afternoon. Interagency collaboration is a rich topic that can go in all sorts of directions. And we hope that our conversation today inspires some new collaboration on your end. And that's all I got.